thank you.
Bob Woodruff,
Here.
right, and Deborah is out, and Charles is out, and we have an empty seat.
So with that, we do not have a quorum present, so we can't do any decision-making, but we can move through the other items.
Well then, let's go ahead and, first we have to, minutes and next meeting.
No problem.
So I guess the first thing on our agenda is a staff presentation, refresher of our purpose, powers, and duties.
All right. So, a week or two ago, or a couple of weeks ago, the chair and I had a short talk about basically what had been happening even in recent years, let alone recent months, associated with this commission. And so what I wanted to do in speaking with him was just get a handle on where did the work program come from, what things have happened in recent years, what have some of the discussions been that are ongoing and would be hard to capture just by looking at one meeting at a time, and those sorts of things. And so one of the things that we talked about, partially because we knew there wasn't anything quasi-judicial or decision-oriented that was particularly going on the agenda, was would it be valuable for us to have a discussion about just the powers and duties and purpose associated with the commission as a refresher. And that was partially from looking at the work plan and seeing that there were a couple of items of interest that weren't on the high priority ones, but that were on the lower, or not, I would say other priorities. And so one of the things, I'm going to pass it around here to the folks that are here in person. Joy, you won't be missing anything because I'll be happy to make sure I read it out loud. But if folks want to take a copy, that's the copy of what went to City Council in 2022 in January, and it's a work plan associated with the Historic Preservation Commission. So they've gone to the City Council and asked about these initiatives, and that was one of the things we talked about too. But I want to start off this presentation really talking about the powers and duties that are currently in front of this commission. So on the next slide, we kind of have some of the highlights associated with the commission, that it was initially formed in 2013 by the City Council, that most of this stuff that I'm going to be sharing with people is in Article, basically, Municipal Code, Article 2.15, and it really has to do with, and is alongside other commissions and how they operate and what they're really intended to be doing. This particular commission is part of what's called the Certified Local Government Program that's run by the State Historic Preservation Office that's under Heritage Oregon. Do I have that right? Oregon Heritage. Thank you very much. And then typical composition for this commission is 6 members, 3-year terms, and there's 1 student member. And then we typically have it meeting quarterly or 4 times a year. And on the next slide, I want to go over the purpose. The following ones are going to be over the powers and duties. I'm going to read the entire purpose, but I don't actually want to read verbatim all of the duties and powers. This is a presentation that's available to any of you. It was sent out in the agenda packet as well, but I do want to hit some of the highlights associated with some of the items. So the purpose, which anytime for me when I do work for planning on something that it's unclear if one of the kind of a duty or a criteria is met, go back to the purpose. That is the whole point of having the purpose at the top of any heading. So the Historic Preservation Commission for the City of Newberg is established to identify, recognize, and preserve significant properties related to the community's history, encourage the rehabilitation and ongoing viability of historic buildings and structures, strengthen public support for historic preservation efforts within the community, foster civic pride, and encourage cultural heritage tourism. So that covers a fairly broad number of things in the purpose, and then as we go to the next slide, we'll start looking at more of those specific powers and duties that come underneath that purpose. So the first one that we see under A, that's really about where you expect to find those. And so that if we do want to have things associated with what the Historic Preservation Commission is doing, those can come from a number of things, including the charter, ordinances, or resolutions of the city, typically from the City Councils, where you expect to see those. The next item here talks a little bit about what we're doing. It talks about one thing that's fairly important to recognize. So in B, when it says maintain a historic resource survey consistent with standards of, and we'll just shorthand it as SHPO, which is the State Historic Preservation Office. So that is something the city has. We've had it for a number of years. It has those historic landmarks. It ties those cultural heritage spots to locations and that characterizes them. The items C and D are somewhat related to each other. So those ones are related to specific properties, and we're talking about landmark designations and the role of the historic preservation associated with historic, either designating landmarks in item C, or any applications that come in for alteration, relocation, demolition of those designated landmarks. Those are the sorts of things that we see there. And so I think that when we talk about things, landmarks and structures tend to be those that pop out or are mentioned the most frequently. And going on to the next slide, we have items E, F, and G. So some of these are more general in nature. The top one, E, support the enforcement of all state laws relating to historic preservation. Very open-ended, but looking for consistency with state law and state goals. The other ones talk about functions that may be designated by the city council, and so kind of a very other duties as assigned, saying that this really, the empowerment of the historic preservation is coming from that city council. And then the third one is kind of interesting because that's really about helping, whether it's applicants or community members, with understanding criteria associated with the various applications that would come along for historic structures and landmarks. And so it's talking about graphic guidelines and example materials. So the Historic Preservation Committee can be part of that process where we make it clear what's expected of applications that come forward as it relates to historic places.
Do we have any of those written graphics? Is there anything like that for folks now?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head, and yeah, not that I'm aware of. We may have them because I will say that just over the course of time and the staff turnover that we've had over the last even several years, has probably not helped us institutionalize memory very well. So it could be, and so if that's something we need to do a dive into, but actually, Rick, is there anything that you're familiar with?
As far as I know, we do not have any.
If you've been here since 2013, and it was formed in 2013, then that sounds like a no.
So, okay. There has not been, we have, because that would take us to formally say, hey, these are the guidelines we wish to impose. And we've never taken up that specific task. They publish, not has to.
Sure,
must.
yeah.
So we've never felt the need to do that, but we haven't felt the need. That would just be something to do. We could do that if we wanted to.
Then kind of going on to the next slide after that, H, I, and J here. So these are all coming out of that code section. So normally this is just in the reference document about where the powers and duties are coming from. So it talks a little bit in H about the kind of the role of informing citizens and visitors about the history, prehistory, research, and other related items associated with historic preservation in the city. So that's another big one that is different than what was mentioned in the last one. I'd say it's broader because it's more of a communication education kind of a component, but informing the citizens and visitors. It may make recommendations to the city council regarding expenditures for historic preservation activities and potential funding sources. So, for example, when a grant becomes available and we want the city council to approve that, typically, the way that I understand it, although since our city manager is sitting here, he's welcome to correct me. If staff feel that they've got direction for something like a grant, they can apply for it, but the city is not going to accept those funds without going to city council for authorization, because that incurs also a use of staff time. But it's not always worth bringing those to city council's attention if we don't know we're getting the money. We can apply for things, but we're not going to accept the money before, even if we're successful, until we get authorization from city council.
That's a perfect summary.
Okay. So, same thing, the Historic Preservation Commission can, for example, make a recommendation to the city council do it because the city council is relying to some extent on the Historic Preservation Commission to pay attention to these sorts of issues, hopefully support those grant applications or what have you. And then last, the commission may recommend, or not last, I think there might be one more actually. Yes. The commission may recommend incentives and code amendments to the city council and planning commission to promote historic preservation. So you see there's an interaction there with another commission but that's associated with, code and that quasi-judicial application of what the commission does, looking at applications and thinking about the way that we set the rules in Newberg to get the outcomes that we're looking for through our codes.
That's another, do we currently have incentives for folks?
I would say that, so we have standards. I don't know if I would call them incentives exactly. So usually in the code,
I have seen no such thing in the ledger,
mhm,
other than ARPA expenditure, which is a tiny sliver.
Yeah.
right. So if there was something that came up that we thought that this commission is supportive of, maybe a technique that another city's using or something we think could incentivize, and that could even how to structure it, for example. I keep using grant programs because that's a pretty common carrot that you would see. But if we had a way that we wanted to do like revolving loan fund or a micro grant program for certain types of activities, then getting input from the Historic Preservation Commission would be one way to figure out what's the best way to do that.
Even something as simple as an award program, where
Yeah,
we award
exactly.
people for historic preservation.
For those sorts of activities, figure out what are the eligible things we might want to do if we had a pot of money to work with. And then on the next slide, is the last two items, it's the kind of more general yet. The commission is allowed to comment on local, state, and federal issues, laws, and requests relating to historic preservation. That one's open-ended. I would say that the comments you would expect to typically channel up through city council if you're getting into state and federal issues, but if there's something that's important that you want to bring to mind, then this body is looking at historic preservation issues. It would be really good to get that input on things as they become emergent or seem important. And then last is adopting rules for conducting its own business. And, do we have bylaws specific for this commission, similar to the planning commission?
Actually, and I could not find any.
Okay,
We do not.
you do not, you haven't seen anything like that either. Okay.
We, as far as conducting business for meetings, we've gone by a very loose interpretation of Robert's rules, but other than that.
Okay.
Best interpretation.
So everyone's behaved well enough that we haven't felt required to do that.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Though I don't know with Rachel here, we might have to.
I know, this is the first time I showed up to one of these meetings, you all were shaking in your boots, so.
Well, we can and it's something that we can always consider, or something that's good for Rachel to know too, if we kind of want the standard standing committee kind of procedures or something like that.
Which is something I'm actually working on
Okay.
right now, so.
There we go.
Yeah, if there is something that's standard for the city, we could probably.
Rachel noticed that many of the standards existed for city council, and indeed some for the planning commission,
Mm-hmm.
were not mirrored in
In others.
documentation for the other committees and commissions. So she's been working on that already quite independently of this discussion.
And I think it's easy for those to fall through the cracks when you're meeting quarterly, maybe if it goes on absence for a period of time, if it struggles at some point to have enough membership, which happens with different committees for different reasons. So, it doesn't mean it's not an important topic, just sometimes we struggle to get enough civic participation.
I know, especially these past 3.
Right.
Oof.
Yeah. So, kind of, with this one, I wanted to highlight a couple of what we would expect to find and where we would find some of the other code sections. So the one that I mentioned earlier was code section 2.15. And so that was one that was about the structure and creation of committees. And so these next couple of slides are about where we find other code sections that are relevant to this committee, or this commission. And so in 15.344, we have the historic landmark subdistrict. So we have a district that covers certain areas, and so there are extra rules that apply to those specific areas because they're considered historically significant. So some of the things that it includes are, it talks about Historic Preservation Commission review, which is quasi-judicial review of applications that are considered, what we would call type 3. That's the procedure they go through, so it means it goes to a public hearing. That is it in a nutshell. And that has to do with designating historic landmarks, removal of landmark designation, and alteration, new construction, or demolitions affecting the exterior appearance of those historically designated landmarks. Next slide, there's some other sub-bullets. Those have to do with new construction on historic sites, and then item 5, demolition and moving of historically designated sites. That's in a nutshell. And I put a note in here on this slide, just that there are some things that don't go to a public hearing, so that section also talks about things that don't have to go through that entire procedure. They can go through a type 1 review for things that are considered minor modifications. So what we're trying to make sure is that historic resources are protected, but we're not handcuffing property owners and making it so onerous that no one would want to be considered that, because historic designation is something that property owners opt into. So that's important to keep in mind. And on the next slide, we have, this is basically a snapshot of not the entire city, but zoomed in a bit to the center or core of the city, that has a higher percentage of things that are noted in our historic sites. And I think that, so I don't know that all of these are historic designated landmarks, and I don't think they are. They are things that are in our inventory.
Yes, simply on our inventory.
Right. And our inventory is interesting, and not every inventory is this way, but those that might be eligible for historic designation are identified, and those that are designated are identified. So there's kind of two major buckets. Robin, do you have a question?
Yeah, okay, clarify that. Okay, so there's historic site, there's an inventory, but they're not,
So you can, something can be designated a historic landmark, in which case there are extra rules that apply, but there's also extra things that it can be available, it can be eligible for, like special grants for cultural resources that are designated. And that's kind of the carrot. So if you're willing to follow and play by these rules associated with maintaining historic character, then it makes you eligible for certain sorts of resources like those that might come available from state agencies or even federal ones.
but we don't have that.
We do.
We do have that.
What he's saying is that the inventory includes both those things that are fully designated and things that also might be eligible in the future to be designated.
So they
Because
would
of their historical age or their
Yeah.
character.
So we do have quite a few buildings in town that are designated historically.
And you have to go through a process to
With
become,
the SHPO, yeah.
The inventory is simply looking around and saying, okay, that building is old enough and has a character that could make it eligible if they want to list it as a historic site. That listing is still something the property owner, the decisions they make. So the inventory is really just says, here's all the cool old places in Newberg.
okay.
You've got to put it in a very, blunt way. And we don't have any control over it. People could, it's still their private property, they could do whatever they want with it. But if they came to us, we'd say, oh, you're on the historic inventory. Sure, that's a shoo-in for getting that as a historic site.
Okay, so they could come to us for certain grant, they would have to come to the city to get,
Yeah, if they wanted to get a historic designation, this would be the place where they start. But they would start with the city, they would go through the process here with the Historic Preservation Commission. And that's part of it being available is if,
they can't
And I
do
would-
that on their own?
they have to go through someone. So as a private property owner, this is the channel for doing it. And so we're part of that pathway. So if you buy a private property, for example, and it's of a certain age and a certain character, and that was part of why you decided to purchase that property, and then you have a chance, because you're saying, okay, what are my options for making sure that this continues to be special in this way that you opted into by buying it? Well, if you found out that it was in the inventory and it was eligible to be designated, you could say, oh, well, I'm eligible and this is already important to me. So if I go ahead and designate it, it makes it available so that you can opt into certain things, like the Cameo Theater, when they did some of their things, they got grant funds to do that. Well, if they hadn't been designated, they wouldn't have been able to obtain those funds. That would be a good example, and that one's high profile enough that everyone kind of gets it, like, okay, there's some special character to that based on its age.
But there's homes in this town, there's also.
And we've been trying to increase, we've been trying to get homes from the inventory on,
We would love to, that was part of, a little off topic here. Yeah, that was part of the outreach that our latest grant was trying to get was, hey, how do we get people to know about our inventory? Because a lot of folks don't even, how do we get them to know about it, and how do we, what do we want it to be? We don't have a lot of restrictions, we'll say, okay, find our rules so that maybe not quite as restricted. But
okay.
outreach.
And
Yeah.
is the inventory, is that publicly accessible?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
So there's a basic webpage, and I actually think there's a ghost webpage floating around somewhere, and those are the ones that kind of have semi-redundant names, and I don't know how you navigate to them, but if you search just right, you can find it, but there's a historic resources webpage for Newberg, and it includes that, and then a few other links that are helpful.
Yeah, we did an inventory update back in, I want to say, 2015 or 15?
So 14.
14, thank you. And part of that grant, an update, was we had it all put onto a website, but of course, that is now that hasn't really been maintained, so, exactly what
The city has grand aspirations for a website overhaul in the not-too-distant future,
The contract is signed.
but it's a big project, so I don't wanna overcommit to things.
Yeah.
It's a big project, but I think that, there's an expectation I would have, that general rollover, you want to see things, the important stuff goes over, gets placed in a way that's easy to navigate, easier for people to find, and hopefully easier for staff to administer on behalf of kind of the citizens, so that we can continue stewarding those things and building those and growing them.
Yes, and if you really wanna go old school, there are binders, physical binders of Xerox pages from the inventory that was done in, when was it? 80, I think it was like 1985, something like that.
So there will be a questionnaire coming out about the website design. When that does, one of the questions is going to be, please tell us the critical URLs that must be moved over and modernized. And it sounds like this is one of those URLs.
Could be, we do get questions about it fairly frequently,
A lot of people like it for research.
and some people want it because that's a resource they wanna know about, and others, they're trying to do kind of due diligence on property. So if it's historic and it's sensitive, and that's not something they want, that's important information too.
Yeah.
They might say, well, that's good for somebody, but maybe that's not a fit for me. So it can be a lot of different reasons.
There's also a lot of, groups that like to do historic home tours.
Yep.
Begging for that kind of information.
A couple of years back, the city had a contractor do an inventory of, like historic sidewalk stamps and sort of the ephemera. Is that captured on that same website, or where would folks find that information?
That's a great question.
That's on the,
I know that happened, but I don't know where the data is.
Yeah.
yeah, well, didn't we integrate that data
Into
with
GIS?
Yes, with our GA.
You and I talked about that, and I didn't look into it further because it was relatively new to me, but I've heard about it multiple times. Rachel, do you have any insight
I was
on that?
trying to think if it went on the gas map.
Did that
I
work?
know it was done. I think I looked into it right after it came out too.
It'd be cool if it's a separate layer.
That was done by,
One of my dreams, for a city our size, we have a lot more of that, I call it ephemera, we have a lot more of that than a lot of places do. But it's slowly going away, for good reasons, but, they just did, last summer, a year or so ago, they redid the sidewalk at, Dayton and Third, right by my house. And so they made it ADA accessible, and it's much more, it's what needed to happen, but when they did that, they cut out the sidewalk stamp that said Dayton Avenue. And I was 10 hours too late. Well, I told the guys, who were doing it, it was a contractor, I said, I'll give you $20 if I can have that chunk of concrete that has Dayton Avenue stamped, and they'd already sent it to the dump. It'd be cool if, okay, we need to do these upgrades, if we could save cut out that sidewalk stamp and save that.
The city's about to have its own sidewalk crew. We've got approval to hire from council. That gives us more, let's say, delicacy around saving those pieces and getting them either reintegrated into a sidewalk if possible, or at least memorializing them.
Well, and Faye just handed me her phone.
Some of them do.
And so the inventory of historic sidewalk features is its own webpage.
Okay.
I've never seen it before, and I don't know how you got there. Did you just do a search in the
So
sidewalk?
only
Make
the
sure
Maybe I,
we need to make sure Emily captures those
Yep.
URLs and put them there.
I've been writing them out.
1900.
Yeah, they're really cool.
The
It's not gold
contractor
Spanish when we do our.
have the name
Yeah,
of
no, done all
an
of them.
advertisement. A lot of them have the street name stamped into the curb.
It looks like only the draft inventory is on the website.
Bob, we
Oh,
have to.
okay, well, we can work on those things, or we can integrate that into the historic Newberg
One of
webpage.
our past counselors, Chuck Zickus, and he walked around the city with his nose to the ground. That was his hobby.
Yes.
He came out of Public Works in, I believe it was Hawaii, and he walked around and found every.
He was a horse ring hunter.
Yes, he was looking for every stamp, every horse ring.
And he got
Probably the right
groups
eye
of
for it.
people helping, and
Yeah.
he did presentations for the Historical Society on it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that would seem very much like a treasure hunt, Easter egg kind of a
Yeah.
thing to find those, which is how those sorts of
Mhm.
assets can be treated, is that you get to have these special things, but it can be hard to find them.
And unfortunately, we've been losing a lot of that, just here, people replace sidewalks, or renovate
Yeah.
things, and not know what is that chunk of concrete, and, so it was a coach block that
Mhm.
we used to
Yeah.
get into that.
We can stop that from happening.
Yeah, so it's a good reason for having that education get out there, and I think
Yeah.
this commission can be part of that. So I wanted to, the last couple of slides are really about the 5-year work program. And so, again, I'm not gonna read every single one of these, especially since most of the people in here have the hard copy in front of them. But this really came about, my understanding is that there was a series of conversations in the commission about the things that you felt were most important for Newberg and its historic resources, and then those recommendations went forward to the city council, and the city council at that time approved it. And there have been changes on city council since then. The text that I've taken for most of this presentation is very similar to what Doug Rux provided to the city council back in May. I added pretty pictures behind it. I shouldn't say just pretty pictures. I took them and gave photo credits to George Fox University and their archives for using those. I thought some people would be extra sensitive if credits were not given. And so I thought I should make sure to do that.
They have done a lot of work.
Yes, they have, and they should be recognized for it.
I wonder.
But it was broken out in 2 major categories, and so there are 6 kind of higher priority topics, and then there were other topics that were identified in that document. And so I thought it was interesting to go through some of these, and one of the things I don't know, because I'm not very familiar with this commission, is exactly how far, what progress we've made in some of these items, or which ones have been experimented with, or even kind of said, why don't we wait until later, because maybe the sequencing makes sense to do things earlier or later. One of the things I'd point out is, all of you know that the historic district designation in downtown area, so that was placed on hold after we got a grant, and that was largely due to staffing. I mean, I got here in November, and October of 2022, and almost immediately after that, we started leading staff out of the community development department. And I can tell you from personal experience, it was not a lot of fun. So come May, we were down 3 staff out of 5 planning staff. 6 planning staff, we still had faith. But we lost 2 assistant planners and 1 associate planner. We had Doug and myself here. So, and the other part of that was, this was all still pretty new, and I think that we were trying to get a handle on what can we do, what direction with this new city council is really the best for us to prioritize acting on. And we weren't trying to kind of fly in the face of the Historic Preservation Commission. So hopefully, if this is the sort of thing that we can do in the future and that's still worthwhile, then we can apply for a grant to fulfill those sorts of things in the future. But we want to make sure that we do it the right way too, and that everybody kind of knows that it's coming. So on the next slide are some of the other items, and there were
Go back real quick.
Oh, sure.
I just had a question,
Yeah.
number 6 there, where it says, historic facade restoration.
Yes.
What is that, what are we looking at there as far as work?
Chapters had done. That was a restoration of their facade. Now, it was not able to be restored completely to the original, because with brickwork is once you take off latex paint, you find it erodes. But they were able to restore it to something approaching.
Yeah.
And so they were able to secure, some grants from the state.
It's on Main Street.
Main
Fence
Street,
and the road.
Main Street initiative.
And so, that was, we were involved in supporting that project. Not contributing funds necessarily, but basically helping to, any way that we could to kind of feed information to the state saying, yes, this is historic asset, here's all our records on it, you know, they have less research to do.
And so are there other facades we're targeting or looking at, right? I mean, I can pick out some.
I think that's, up to the property owners, but we can.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, we
Hello?
can.
Yeah, I work for Hop Insurance, and I know that John Powell, the new owner of Hop Insurance, he's trying to get a grant to do facade, to get it back to the original. And also, when you're talking about the sidewalks, there is a signature outside the building of C.F. Moore, who was a pharmacist, that was who was in the building originally, back in 1909 when it was built.
Oh,
Wow.
Yeah.
Exactly, kind of, you know, what we want to get in contact with, how can we help?
And Ruddock Wood, of course, is going to change its facade in some way.
Mhm.
Let's hope that's done with sensitivity, right?
I think so.
Yeah, well-
I believe they, the channels are supposed to. Yep.
The holdup is we, so far, even with working with George Fox, we have not been able to find a photo of, you know, a really good photo of what it looked like originally. We have a shot of the inside, but not the exterior.
That would be challenging.
Yeah,
And so this, you know, my words, it kind of feels like the commission's sort of in a reboot phase right now, you know, between, you know, everything, you know, putting the historic designation on hold, you know, we don't even have a quorum, you know, we're kind of needing to rebuild members. This is kind of our current work program, is that correct?
Yes.
And so, okay, and so, you know, we can revisit and tweak it, we can kind of reboot, but this is, so I just wanted to get clear, and that's helpful to talk about, like, what we mean when we say historic building facade restoration. That's, you know, identifying and helping kind of recruit folks to do more stuff like they did in chapters.
And Bob, if we, you know, the commission currently looks at this and says, we don't like what the 2022 commission put out as our work program, we can go to council and say, hey, we want to change our work program, here's our proposal. If we look at this and say, oh, those, you know,
Yeah.
everyone in 2022, what were you thinking? We can change it. It's, what it does do though, is essentially, the idea of a work program is, if we are lacking kind of, it gives us a direction, a guide, where do we want to head next? And especially for staff, it gave Doug, you know, Doug really was pushing for this, because it gave him kind of if he was thinking, oh, hey, here's an opportunity, I can bring this to the Historic Preservation Commission because it's on our work program.
Right, so that's one of the things that really work programs are really helpful, especially for things like historic preservation or other items that are very, very topical. If you see something that looks highly eligible and you already know what the priorities are, it lets you align that to make sure that your limited time that you've got available for that issue area is used with those priorities in mind. So if we know that we've got a top 6, but that we've got another dozen or so things that we're also interested in, that does give staff to say, well, we know these are the important things, but when maybe I don't have a most important thing coming up for the next meeting, I can sub in some of those other ones to make sure I'm still working on things that are still important. They're just not quite as important as the other things. We need to keep those in focus areas.
Well, just looking, you know, one's completed, one's on hold, so essentially we have 4 items on our work program right now. And, you know, 2 of them are coordinating with other entities, which, you know, sounds like outreach is one of the key things, like, I don't think folks know that we exist right now as a commission, certainly not looking to us as a resource. If I'm a local business owner, actually, if I'm a local building owner, I'm not looking to this commission as a resource right now. We've been in the past, and, you know, I think we will be again, but, so those 2 outreaches are good. Updating Newberg's historic inventory, that feels a little more staff-driven than it does commission-driven, but, you know, that as a priority seems to make sense.
one of the reasons it's on there is because that actually is something that we could get some grant money to even, our staff aren't, basically, we can hire a contractor to help our staff rather than rely on our staff.
None of the staff that we have right now are technical experts that could do that, so we would definitely have to hire someone.
I just to get some input on number 6. It's very closely related to number 3 as well, because most of the grants you're going to get to do that work are from the Oregon Main Street program. And that was the grant used for chapters and for, Cameo was from the Oregon Historic Theaters grant program, but they're all from SHPO. So that's very similar work, just, you know.
Yeah. No, that's helpful.
And in some, when we, on other ones on the list, some of those include more training and education-oriented ones too. And so one of the things that I did following the conversation with Rick was reaching out to, State Historic Preservation Office and talking about those and making more trainings available to this commission. But realistically, this commission's a public meeting, so one of the things that I would really encourage commissioners here to do is help spread the word in town if you think there's anyone that's even remotely interested in historic preservation, and we have an interesting training or someone coming to speak to us. That's really a good opportunity for you to kind of do the bring a friend technique.
And that's something I was trying to clarify in my own head, what our current work program is, because as I talk to folks, like, okay, what am I signing up to do? Well, you know, really those 4 things are, right now, what we'd be asking folks to sign up to do.
What's
That
not...
could change, that could and likely will change, but right now, those are the 4.
And what's not on here that is part of the action area that you all would work in is that quasi-judicial capacity, when projects come forward. But when I spoke to Rick, it seemed like we don't have a constant influx of those going on, but we do have them coming in occasionally. A lot of times those modifications will be minor, so they'll really happen at a staff or administrative level. But when they're a bigger one, we want to make sure that if there's a chance for us to make a change to a historic resource that could have a big impact, that's when it comes to your group.
That is, when Recipe was renovations and rebuilding after their kitchen fire, that, redoing that back inside, that's the south side of their building, was work that they came to the commission, said, here's our plans, and, you know, it preserving the historic character of the building, and so that was something that, and that was a shoo-in, because they'd already done a ton of research, and came to us, you know, with a great plan, so, it was a no-brainer. But that's the most recent example. Those have not come up, because that was actually, boy, what, in 20...
I don't remember.
What about the library, though? The library's between their windows, and...
That was considered a minor modification, so we could do that administratively.
Because they're making the most expensive.
So,
Okay.
and that's what we work with, the planning division works with folks to figure out, do you get to take kind of the easy path, the administrative path, or do we need to go to a public hearing because there's some wishier stuff that we need to worry about, where it's kind of exceeded a certain threshold? That would happen to be highly visible, because it's, you know, right on the street it's on, and you have some giant windows with boards on them.
So we made sure there was a certified historic preserver, rejuvenator, everything goes back in, even the glass goes back in the new wood frames, the same glass. So they're gonna take the glass out, make sure it's not cracked, doesn't get ruined, and they're responsible for that, and make it look exactly the way it did at the turn of the old century.
So pretty cool, and that's how you have to do those things, so you get to have a building that functions in modern society, but is still a historic resource. So,
Do we know when that's supposed to be done? I don't know.
You know, I haven't checked in recently, but soon. I know it will be soon, because we have heard some chatter about people can't see the mystery section and all that because it's dark. All the boarding up. Makes it hard to find the things on the bottom shelf.
And there's been a lot of concern, people wondering if it's been vandalized,
Yeah.
things like that.
We have to tap that down through the social engagement channels, like, no vandalism.
Yeah.
so.
Okay, thank you.
So on the next slide, we've got some of these, and so this starts the list over again because it goes on to this one and following. But these are other ones that are were kind of interest, but were not considered as high priority, or they had a lower likelihood of being eligible for outside funding. And so that was one of the things that Rick and I talked about too, was that signage, which I found very interesting and I did not know before we had a chat, was that it turns out that most programs don't want to pay to make your signs for you. But they will pay for other things that might be complementary with it, such as research or those sorts of things on wayfinding, signage, and education. So that's one of the reasons you find things like the banners, the signage at number 1, signage at number 2, those sorts of things. But one of the things I also wanted to point out,
Talking about signage, just curious, did the commission have, because I'm still I've only been to like 3 meetings, so, and we're kind of in this reboot. Did the commission have any input or involvement with the historic signs that have gone up around? That's all through the historical society?
Not directly.
So I was the president of the Historical Society and I wrote the text for those.
Yeah.
So we did not work with the Historic Preservation Commission directly on that. We got permission through the city to put them up. And the city now owns those signs and is expected to maintain them. But the Historical Society did all the work on it.
A lot of members of the commission were active in the society, so there was a lot of indirect communication, but not a need for direct communication because we weren't able to do this through a SHPO grant. And so there really, honestly, wasn't much the commission could do for that specific project.
We raised all the funds for it.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was done.
One of the ones that I wanted to call out, which is actually on the next slide, is the Future Certified Local Government Program grant opportunities. So if you find a grant opportunity that we appear to be eligible for, you do not have to limit that to just that program. So it's okay to bring those to the attention of staff or whomever. I also wanted to point out that certified local government trainings are something that their staff said that they would be happy to do. And from talking to Rick, it sounds like we should probably be taking more advantage of that because we have maybe been kind of leaving some of that education on the table and making an observation that if we're in a reboot phase, makes even more sense.
I really like that idea of a reboot.
And I think that having this work program gives us areas that we can focus those trainings on. So that was something that Curry, one of the lead staffers that we would be coordinating with, asked if we had any areas that we knew that we would want to work in. Well, if you recall from 2 slides back where it said historic building facade restoration, I used those high priorities as areas that we would like to be most interested in trainings on, and tried to pull other ones from other areas in the list too. So it's really valuable to have something like this, even if it changes over time, not a big deal. So that's that. I think that might be the last slide that I've got here. That's it for this. This turned into more of a chat and less of a just outright presentation.
I think it's time.
So if it went over a little longer than anticipated, I apologize for that, but thanks for bearing with me. I think it's a valuable refresher. Does anyone have any other questions or any issues they wanted to bring up before we move on to the next topic?
I feel this is really time well spent because a lot of it is just kind of, especially being able to meet together in person. I'm finding that we're able to get a little bit more energy into the commission because the pandemic sucked all the energy this commission had. I will just, I felt we were doing good and then we had been in kind of a holding pattern for about.
Well, Origin Heritage did a study on that and every organization like this experienced exactly that.
Yeah. Before we move to the next presentation, if you don't mind, Chair, I'd like to jump in. We received a public comment that I haven't distributed.
Please.
So, Will, would you pass it around? I think there's enough for everyone to take one.
We rarely get public comments, so.
And I'll read it aloud since Joy is attending remotely.
Okay.
So, Joy, we can make sure we include this in the agenda packet once it gets republished or put out with the minutes, but.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, this comment was received on November 28th. And I'm going to try and differentiate the fields where we asked them a question and where they responded. So the field is date of the meeting you would like to give a public comment, and this is, they noted Tuesday, November 28th, 2023. The field to fill out. The next one was, please let us know the agenda item you will be speaking on, otherwise it will be submitted as a general comment. And the response was support for Historical Society. The field was name, and it was from, this comment is from Britta Mansfield. And then the next field is representing, so who's representing? The response is Newberg Area Historical Society. Britta provided her address and, her email address. And the question, next applicable question that was filled out was, would you like to give written or spoken public comment? And they responded written. The next field was, if you would like to give a written public comment, please write the public comment you would like to give here. And they simply state, the Newberg Area Historical Society seeks the city's support for our operations. The Newberg Area Historical Society would like to know if the City and Historic Preservation Commission sees value in having a functioning historical society and what benefit it brings to the community. If there is an interest, we would love to meet with the Historic Preservation Commissioner to align our organizational goals with those of the city to better serve the community. Thank you for your time and efforts. Please direct any questions to newberghistory@gmail.com. Thank you, Britta Mansfield. Any comment?
Well, it sounds like Britta might be a good person to approach about being on the committee.
Yeah.
You're good.
Say that again?
She's
Yeah.
fine.
Good.
So we'll see what the mayor decides, but.
What's, do you know anything about Britta? This is interesting.
I know a lot about Britta. I trained
I-
her, so.
I actually met with her a few weeks ago and talked to her about the
Britta is a brilliant,
Yeah.
person who, she came
Awesome.
into a love of Newberg history when she was attending George Fox, and that was several years ago, and that love has only grown into, she's written a book.
Is she, and she's, she's the author?
Yes, so she's
Oh.
actually going to be presenting to council in January, about a book she just published about Newberg history. She is the executive director of the Willamette Falls and Landings Heritage Area Coalition. She was the former executive director of Newberg Downtown Coalition. She's also worked at the Hoover Minthorn House Museum as the director. She's been on the board of the Historical Society. She's done internships with the Rotary,
Wow.
George Fox,
Okay.
the Archives.
Yes.
Been around.
Yeah.
The whole cavalcade.
And, she is significantly younger than me. So, yeah, she's great. And I worked with her on board of the Historical Society for many years, and I supervised 4 of her internships when she was in college, so I've known her for a very long time. She knows what she's doing and is an asset. Yeah.
Yes.
Outstanding.
She would be an asset to this commission.
It would be.
Well, and it sounds like generally this commission is supportive of collaborating with the Historical Society, Newberg Area Historical Society, correct? That doesn't seem like a surprise, but
No,
We had a lot of cross-pollination, and I think it's only for the betterment of both groups and the community.
Am I wrong? It feels like the Historic Society meetings and our meetings overlap sometimes. I've been meaning to get to one of their meetings, and I just haven't been able to schedule it, and I could be wrong, and we only meet quarterly, so it's not that big a deal, but, yeah, I'll have to look at that.
Yeah.
I feel like there's an overlap.
if that's something the commission wants to reconsider so that you don't have, I mean,
Yeah.
if you have one major collaborator and you're accidentally meeting.
We need to check and make sure I'm right, there's other things that are scheduling conflicts I've had that I haven't gotten to a meeting, but, yeah, that would be a low-hanging fruit.
Are they on that new calendar that we created?
They don't have any meetings for the rest of this year. They're kind of reevaluating their meeting schedule. Historically, it has been the last Tuesday of every month. There's nothing,
At the same time.
yes, so
that's-
same,
yeah,
but
that's a lot.
you guys are 4 times a year, they were every month.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And one of the reasons this commission has always met on a Tuesday, it was, due to staff availability and, basically, we didn't want to ever avoid conflicts with council meetings and, but in theory, we could
staff can, I mean, we can look into that, and if we look like there's something that's ripe for a decision, send something out to the commission, like a doodle poll or something like that, to get availabilities,
Right.
and think about that.
And if it's just a matter of missing the every last Tuesday of the month, it's not the last Tuesday of the month.
Yeah, scheduling meetings is a hard thing.
Yeah.
Changing can make things
Yeah.
worse for a minor overlap, but just something to think about.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so Britt is the current president?
I believe she's serving as president right now.
Okay.
I just left the board, in October, so.
Okay, and so you've got good insight.
Mhm.
What I'm hearing you say, it sounds like they're going through their own reboot.
Yeah,
Okay.
basically, we've been very strong for a long time. We lost several members during COVID because of health,
Yeah,
we lost them,
yeah.
they passed away. But there's a lot of support. Right now, they're trying to kind of regain the volunteer base. We had some very long-term board members, myself included, that were burnt out, basically.
Yeah.
And it's time to build up some more support for that. They have funds, they have ideas, not tons of funds, just minimal, and ideas, and lots of ideas, but we need.
Are they a 501c3?
Yep, 501c3 nonprofit.
Getting back to the signage and what I said, even if we didn't, we don't have the funds to put sign in, but they did, several places signage came up, and one of the things it mentioned too about the Blaine corridor up to the, cultural center.
Yep.
And, that's been an issue for a long time, there's sort of a dead zone, there's not kind of a natural flow of storefronts or businesses that kind of goes kind of that way. So finding things like signage could be a way to strengthen that connection between, it's not that far, but First Street to the cultural center can be a long way. If you're just coming to go check out the shops on First Street, you're not likely to go up to the cultural center, you're not likely to go down to Memorial Park. But if there's wayfinding or signage, and so we could be maybe a conduit to help coordinate that, so like as different groups get funding, it all looks the same or flows together nicely.
The Blaine Street project, I was on the board of that organization too, or, cause I accidentally joined them all. That one, did end, but it kind of became the public art council,
Okay.
which is happening.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and Robin is on the art selection committee for that, and I was their former executive director, public art manager, so yeah, for a brief time, but that.
So when did you run the chamber?
I haven't run the chamber yet. No, I don't plan on running the chamber.
So with that, then the next, so I just wanted to get the public comment in there so that we could think about it before we get into the next presentation, before we get to staff or commissioner comments. But that's all I've got. If we want to proceed on to the next agenda item, that would be,
Sure.
so,
Next agenda item would be a presentation from our city recorder.
So I will, share this. Some of you have heard this before, and some of you know this information because a lot of it came from the outline, basic outline and thesis came from something developed by George Edmondson, who was the founder of the Historical Society, though I've changed it and added my own stuff to it. So please ask questions, let's get into it. I've studied local history for a long time and I love to talk about it. So, and since some of you have already heard the main spiel, come ask more. So I'm going to chat about basically how the city of Newberg formed, and there were 4 attempts to start a town site here. So I'm going to talk through those 4 attempts and what happened, and how Newberg finally kind of became the town it is today. And Will actually hasn't heard this talk because he was gone when I gave it.
oh, that's
I did flick through the
Did
PowerPoint.
you? Okay, well.
I couldn't help myself, I was like, yes.
Yes. So, I always loved, so the Grubby End was the colloquial name for this area of the Willamette Valley because it was full of, like, low-lying bushes and wasn't really good for growing things, which we'll get into in this presentation. And, our main street is not the main street of town, which a lot of people find very interesting. So, that we'll get into as well. I forget which device I'm using here. So, the first plat that was recorded was Rogers Landing, and Rogers Landing is what you know today down at the waterfront. It was recorded in 1848 and originally called Chehalem. It had historically been known as Placide's Landing after one of the early French fur trappers in this area. It joined many, many small towns that were all up and down the banks of the Willamette River. If you start driving out 219 or heading down River Street, heading towards Salem, you'll see, site of Fairview or Wheatville, there's a bunch of different ones. Historic site of all these towns that have all closed. But there were tons of towns dotting the banks of the Willamette River, and Rogers Landing, or Chehalem, was an attempt to start a town there. Joseph Rogers, who platted it, built a house there and maybe a small store, but nothing ever came of it. The only thing we know was a house at that location. As you can imagine, that flooded all the time. It was flooding in 1843, 53, 61. 61 is what took out the entire town of Champoeg. And at that point, that town site just completely died out. Nothing ever became of it.
So was Rogers then a contemporary of Ewing Young? Would they have known each other?
Very close, yeah. Ewing Young was here, Ewing Young died in 1841. So, they probably, they could have overlapped a little bit before Ewing Young passed away. I don't know when Rogers got to this area, but I'd assume it's before he platted. And yeah, nothing ever became of that site. Down there. Yeah, no, that's fine. That's a photo. I happened to be down there on a beautiful day and get a photo of the river. The second attempt at a town site was at the near Walgreens location, and that was the site of the first Quaker church, Friends Church, in Newberg. And so the Friends had come to this area searching for places to start a colony. And if you didn't know, Oregon, with all the free land with nobody on it, which we know is not true, became this site for utopian or religious colonies. Aurora was a German Brethren colony. Scotts Mills was also another Quaker colony, and Newberg was identified by a Quaker minister from Indiana named William Hobson, who came out here, and he called it a garden of the Lord, and he said he could see the valley filled with a beautiful town. So he went back and gathered Quakers, and they started heading this way. So there was a small church at that site, the home of David and Margaret Wood, see their house there, and a post office, a blacksmith shop. Nothing was ever platted at that location, so it was never formally designed as a town site, but if you see post office, a blacksmith shop, and a church forming in a location, that's a town trying to grow. And you've got homes building up in that location as well, and there's a cemetery nearby. So a lot of people were starting to form there. Sebastian Brewster, who was the postmaster, and actually named Newberg in that location. So in 1869, that became the name of Newberg after his hometown in Bavaria. So Newberg was named for his hometown. And that was tradition that the postmaster got to name the town site if it wasn't officially platted. So that was.
Is Brewster known to have been a Quaker?
Brewster was not.
That's what I always wondered about.
The Everest family was. So there's some interesting, he married into the Everest family, so you have some interesting overlap there.
Just a quick sidetrack, I never knew this, but it just came up recently.
Yeah.
That there's been different spellings of Newberg over the years. Yeah, I never knew that.
It's always officially been the spelling it is now, but people have always spelled it different ways. And even when Herbert Hoover came to town to dedicate the Hoover Menthorne House, he didn't get tongue-tied, but the person introducing him got tongue-tied and called it Newberger, on, national radio, and it's a really funny recording of the whole crowd just cracks up. That was in front of a former president. So, yeah, it's been several spellings. There's only one other Newberg with an E in the US, and it's, not an incorporated town. So, yeah. The third town site, which was officially platted, was along Main Street. So in Main Street, the Ruddock Wood Plat was formed in 1881. You guys been to Ruddock Wood Restaurant, hopefully, or maybe not, but, that plat is named after, or that restaurant is named after that plat. So that plat was about 5 acres around what was going to be a railroad depot. So you had Chehalem Valley Mills, which the building is still there, the Catholic church that's still there, the commercial or Purdy Hotel is also known as the Corner Hotel, which is in this picture here. That's about at the site of Gem 100. There was the brick plant, butcher shop, and a train depot, all right there. However, so development shot up, people started buying, they were forming a town along that location, but the railroad didn't come through when expected. It was delayed by 7 years, and so everything started to dwindle, the town didn't take off. And so by 7 years later, there wasn't much happening. There were a few businesses there, but nothing was growing at all. So, years later, you finally have the Edwards plat. So that's the fourth and final plat, and it's basically what the town is today. It was formed in 1883, which is not that much later than the plat, the Redwood plat, only 2 years later. But the Edwards plat was based along First Street here, and it was established by Jesse Edwards, who is known as the father of Newberg. He was a Quaker. He helped found George Fox University. He helped start the first Friends Church in town. He came with the big Quaker migrations. They started arriving in the 1870s and then more and more in the 80s. So when he showed up, he platted this town. He owned the brickworks on Main Street as well. Many of the brick buildings in this town are actually made from bricks from his plant. That eventually became the Wilhelmina brick and are like worldwide known. They're amazing bricks. They're very, very strong. So what ended up happening is that the agricultural efforts of the Quakers and the brick-making industry were what made the town finally successful. I said we'd get into agriculture a little bit in a second, and I'll explain a little more of that, but the town wasn't succeeding, and a lot of that was due to agriculture, but the Quakers brought in a unique perspective. Because this was the Quaker end of town, it became known as the godly end of town, and Main Street became known as the ungodly end of town, even though there's a Catholic church in the middle of it. And so there was a lot of reference to the godly and ungodly ends of town. And then finally, this plat was successful enough that it became incorporated as a town in 1889 and a city in 1893. We need to start celebrating that in February.
But the ungodly end of town, it didn't have a rip-roaring saloon or anything?
There
Or
were
did it?
saloons at different times, but then the Quakers kicked them all out.
Okay. So the ungodly does not, it's a sectarian divide, it does not refer to a
Yes.
wild...
It was a sectarian divide, and a lot of the early settlers in this area did not come with a whole religious group and may not have been godly according to some standards.
I come from a long line of Quakers, and there are Quakers even today who would view any other religion as ungodly.
Yep.
Particularly Catholics.
Oh, yes.
Because of the ceremony and all of the accoutrements that go with it.
Well, the Presbyterians in Scotland felt the same way about the Catholics.
Exactly. To a Quaker, that would be as ungodly as you could get.
The Quaker founding of this town has had an indelible mark on who we are. Just the whole character of this town, the way things are set up, a lot of the quirks come from the Quaker founding, and a lot of people don't realize that. But it's down to how informal people are at George Fox with students calling professors by their first names, and just the general way that people are adverse to hierarchies here, because that's a Quaker thing. We like egalitarianism. The fact that women always had the right to vote in Newberg is a Quaker thing. Women could always vote here, so when the state finally allowed it, they were like, big whoop, we've been doing it for a long time. So there's a lot of interesting, unique things about Newberg that come from those Quaker roots. They're absolutely fascinating. With that?
Oh, I was just thinking with my great-grandfather brought the game of basketball to George Fox, back to the specific academy, or...
Yeah, can you go back to the hotel picture?
And they played basketball in the third-story ballroom of the Purdy Hotel. It was the only place that's big enough.
The first basketball
It
game.
would be in the 1890s. When basketball was this exciting as it is.
I love that.
Like the pickleball of the 1890s,
Yeah.
is that what you're saying?
They played against, the Oregon, Agricultural College, which is OSU, Oregon State. And actually, the first football game that George Fox ever played was against Oregon State, and George Fox won, so.
All right.
We can go back to the No, that's why I said, let's have
these pictures,
conversation.
it's hard to see.
Oh, I love these. So these are all from the digital commons at George Fox as well. There's a credit on the last slide. This was, so I didn't tell you why you should trust everything I say. I, was the archivist at George Fox for 8 years. And so I put all these online and made them available publicly many years ago. And then I was on the board of the Historical Society for 9 years. And, have done a lot of research. I've got bachelor's and master's degrees in American history and love local history.
And that's why when I saw your application to become our state recorder, my little heart sung.
Yeah. I thought maybe you wrote the posting for me, so, you know. So I said that a lot of the success of the town came from agriculture. So, as I said, along the banks of the river, there were all these different little towns popping up. And they were mostly based on a cash crop of wheat, of wheatlands, right? The Wheatland Ferry. All of these places were based on a cash crop of wheat. If you were down at Rogers Landing and you look across the river, you see a nice flat area, right? It's not that high from the banks of the river. And on this side of the river, you see a steep embankment. All of the fertile soils, which the nice flat areas, and Newberg got the light stuff that washes away. So basically, crops that are cultivated on a yearly basis here do not do well because all the nutrients wash out of the soil. If you've ever tried to grow a garden for your home, you have to bring in dirt here, because the dirt here will not grow. And so the early settlers were all trying to grow wheat here, like every other place in the area, and it would not grow in Newberg. And so when the Quakers showed up, they brought orchards. And their early orchards of cherries and prunes, which are a specific type of plum, and apples, all sorts of things. They did very, very well because you plant once and do not cultivate yearly, and so they survived in the soil. So you saw orchards, then you saw nut orchards, especially filberts, and then you saw berries come in, and now we see the wine industry coming in, because all of those things can survive that type of soil. So our jewelry soil here does well with that, but it did not do well with yearly cultivation. And then you had things like the annual Berry and Festival established from that. So I love this photo there. That's a great overview of Newberg. That's okay. That great early overview is great. You see the Edwards House on the far right, straight back. There's the Edwards House, which was the president's house at George Fox until recently. The building on the very far right with the tower was the original Pacific College building. And then the Edwards House is just to the left of that, and it was actually, College Street ran straight into the home. And years ago, they took that house and turned it 90 degrees and moved it off of College Street. So it's still standing over there, it's still that same shape. And then the Hoover Minthorn House tucked on the other corner. You can't quite see it well in this photo, but there's some, this photo has a detailed description in the background that talks about all sorts of cool things about the early history of Newberg. And the orchard, you can see some orchards here in the foreground from that barn. And one of the small barns in this photo is actually still standing in one of the alleyways. So there's a lot of historic buildings in that photo that are still here. Or like the white church in the middle was the Baptist church, and that congregation still exists here. So there's Grace Baptist now.
I was gonna say it's a Grace Baptist.
Yeah, Grace Baptist, the official name is First Baptist Church of Newberg. Grace is just their working name. Yep, but they've been around since 1891. Church Fox. Yep. Okay, I'm gonna move on to the next page. So, like I said, what finally happened with agriculture is we moved on to wine, because the wine industry did really well. But that didn't happen until after Newberg stopped being a dry town. So Newberg was a dry town until 1966, largely due to the influence of the members of the Society of Friends. I believe that, you know, a lot of those women from the Women's Christian Temperance Union would come and just paint that away if they saw our town today. One of them might be talking about that. I gave a presentation about one of them for a while, and during one of my presentations, a bunch of things fell off the wall, and everyone was like, what's going on? It was pretty funny. But they historically abstained from drinking alcohol. Some still hold to the temperance, and some do not now. But in 1966, after several attempts to make Newberg drop its dry town. They finally succeeded, and it was a really, really close vote. We're talking, 51% of the vote. It was very close. Before this time, there were bars right outside of city limits, places like,
heard about this.
Garden Cafe.
Yep.
Yeah, which is at the Finnegan's location. They were right outside of city limits, and they served alcohol. Or there were places in Dundee, right outside of city limits, Bunfies, In fact, 99W was a horse racing track historically, so drive-in was a horse racing track. So there were places right outside of town, and I've been told that there were a lot of things in town, so it was happening. But because of this, also a lot of the early deeds for homes in this town actually have a clause in them that if spirituous liquors are found in the house, the deed reverts to the original owners. I'd like to see someone try and actually make that happen, but yeah, the first vineyards in the Dundee Hills were planted in 1966, right when Newberg dropped their dry status, and went on to win awards almost immediately. So one thing you see is there were lots of different communities in this area. I talked about 4 different locations that were trying to start towns. Now, when those towns didn't take off, not everyone left, like a lot of people lived there, stayed, of course. So you have Rex, Votaw, Springbrook, Chehalem, West Chehalem, Chehalem Center, Fernwood, and many more towns that were all right here in this area in what is Newberg today. So eventually, all of those slowly came together. Newberg's original city limits ended at the Hess Creek Canyon, which is where Hoover Park is. So it didn't go very far, and then you had Springbrook right over there, and Rex right over there, Fernwood right over there. And so all these places slowly came together. I really love my last bullet point in here. In 1891, the Newberg Graphic reported that the population was expected to crest 50,000 within 20 years with the addition of the Friends College and an Adventist college, which I can find absolutely no record of.
So it's not just PSU that gets that wrong all the time?
No. So, I mean, we're saying that now, right? We're gonna be at 50,000 in 20 years. They were saying it in 1891 as well, when their population was about 500. So, that was a really funny detail. Both of the photos on this are actually taken from the top of the Cultural Center building, which was the Central School building. So you can see the bottom photo, you see George Fox on the, at the far end, and the 3 sisters, you see one of the houses, and on the other end, you can see pointing the other direction, towards, oh goodness, towards Main Street. So there are several historical entities in town that you guys should be aware of. Obviously, the Historical Society has been around for almost over 12 years now. Hooverman Thornhouse Museum is here in town, that's run by the Colonial Dames of America. Yamhill County Historical Society is supportive of local history, and then of course there's the George Fox University Archives, who have an awesome new archivist and archives assistant. So there's lots of resources in town that you can reach out to. And all of these entities would be happy to work with the Historic Preservation Commission. And I've been involved with all of them in one way or another over the years, so, yeah.
And I would,
Okay, pretty much, yeah.
from a general staff perspective, I would also suggest that, think about what the role of the Historic Preservation Commission is or could be, and think of the other entities that are in town, so stuff that it's hard for this commission to do, maybe they could do it and it's not quite so hard. And similarly, there might be limitations on what they can do. I mean, it looks good when things like a city gives a letter of support for a grant application. And frankly, that's not very hard for something like Historic Preservation Commission to do with an established partner.
And things I've seen in other cities, are things like in Silverton, the city worked to give a house to the Historical Society to run a museum in. So they own the house and they own the property, they set it up, and then the Historical Society runs something. There's all sorts of different things that have been done in different areas to support historical work. So there's ways to partner that are really unique. So I encourage you to think.
Steal all the good ideas from other towns.
Oh, yes.
You remember that, Bill?
If you see another town doing something, you're like, ooh, I'm gonna do that. And bring it back, share it with your commissioners.
That was a fun one.
Oh, yeah. Shamelessly steal programs that other communities develop, because there's no reason not to.
Right, they want you to, they'll feel good about it.
The signs here are directly from Silverton.
Yes.
So years ago, Rick and I and a few other people drove out to Silverton for the day, spent the day learning from their historical society, and then came back and just shamelessly stole their, which, with their permission, of course. They gave us all their engineering, everything.
These pedestal signs, do it this way with it.
Yep.
The, arrangement and everything, so.
And they'd been around 40 years, so we just said, okay, what's your success? And so those kinds of field trips are very beneficial.
All right.
But with that, that is our programs. So I guess just cleaning up the last bits of the agenda, any other items from staff?
No big pressing items. We can certainly take into account and consider changes to the schedule in the future. And one of the things I wanted to share with the commission is there have been some internal conversations about how this commission will be managed and where it gets managed out of. So we're talking about that, and so there have been discussions about transitioning it over to the recorder's office potentially in the future. But if that happened, then it would remain, that the community development department would act as a technical liaison, specifically for those quasi-judicial items. And some of the rationale there is that there really are a lot of programmatic ongoing items going on. There's only so many quasi-judicial items coming in the door. So that would be something that could be a change. We don't want it to impact the commission in any undesirable way. We happen to have an extremely knowledgeable person in the city recorder's office. So that seems promising. So that's one of the things.
How far along is that discussion? Because it seems like, you know, again, with kind of the reboot theme, like, if that's if we're on the cusp of that, this is a good time to do that.
It's just a notion that has been floated at this
Yeah.
juncture. It's not got developed really legs yet, but it's
Yeah.
evolved. Right.
And my understanding is we would be very unique in Oregon in doing it that way.
So we're being cautious about that. When I talked to the staff from the Certified Local Government Program at SHPO, they said that they're not aware of any other programs that do it that way. But there's lots of ways to slice different things, and internally we've said we could always do a run where there's a period of time and then we revisit that in X period of time, a couple of years or something like that. Additionally, we don't have a community development director right now. I'm serving as interim. We're going to be posting that soon. So we would also want to make sure if that person comes in a leadership role that we haven't just stripped their department of some things that they feel strongly about. We're trying to walk softly on that sort of thing too.
I have no desire to steal it, but I do have experience. So I actually worked for SHPO for a while too, so the Oregon Heritage Department. It sounds like I've had a bunch of
You see where this idea came from,
So
right?
that's why we've had this discussion, because I actually would have been the person doing your training.
And we wouldn't lose out on any funding, potential grants or anything, because it doesn't matter to
We would want it.
SHPO, who's our coordinator in the city.
That's right. So there are other things that we'd have to maintain to keep that CLG status and this commission is part of that, but that does not appear to be one of them.
Yeah.
So they don't care that it's the planning department that
No.
oversees what you're doing.
My wife's been on the Traffic Safety Commission for years and years. Sometimes it's with the police and sometimes it's with engineering.
Oh,
You know, but
similar.
as staff needs change, it doesn't really change the work of the commission.
Mhm.
It changes the work of the staff behind
Who
the scenes.
administers it, really?
And kind of where the idea kind of floated was just planning, building, they have so many committees to staff. There's not that many staff, and having accidentally inherited somebody who is a leading expert in all of these fields, it kind of resonated that maybe we should explore this, but certainly we would want the new planning director to be on board to open that dialogue.
Let's say has experience. I don't know if I'm a leading expert in every field.
Given all the different committees you've been on and all the roles you've had, you're extremely multifaceted.
So with that, I don't have any other items from staff unless either of you do, or unless Faith has something.
Now, I just wanted to say hi. I have a history degree as well, although it's in entirely the wrong centuries. But,
Mine is the wrong continents,
well, medieval European history.
late colonial,
This-
Middle East.
This area did exist during those time periods, just so you know. There was stuff happening here, there was history. So,
I am not familiar with that archaeology though.
yeah. Not many people are, unfortunately.
So, before we we adjourn. Any other items from commissioners? Discussions, formal business, I think we got a lot done. So, I will encourage you, if you know of anyone who would like to serve on, and especially a student, are looking for students.
Well, I just had a thought. I would suggest reaching out to Corey Burkle, also a family of long residents in this city, to see if there is one of their well-known teens. They have teenagers that they know really well that are in the library world, just to see if a name pops up in her mind for a student commissioner. She might know somebody.
And also just doesn't necessarily have to be someone who has a deep love of history, but maybe just would like to see how city commissions work.
And I'll brag, my daughter is in the National Honor Society,
Cool.
and one of the requirements is that they have to do a certain number of volunteer hours.
Oh.
So I'll have her let the Honor Society coordinator know to announce it to the kids.
That's a great idea.
That really is a great idea.
I can send you the application link if you want to
Yeah,
share it with
that'd
her.
be great.
Wonderful, because student commissioners always bring a lot of just churn to us, that things that us old folks don't think about, quite frankly. So, all right. Unless there's anything else, I declare the meeting to be adjourned.
All right, we're done.